Welcome to this section on theoretical perspectives. My name is Dr. Paul Naduku, a lecturer in psychology, University of Ghana. This section and the next section will deal with theoretical perspectives in psychology. The science of psychology is one where there are many approaches or theories that we work with, which we use to explain human behavior and mental processes. So this section will deal with what a theory is, the essence and relevance of theories, the relationship between the theory and theoretical perspective, and then we'll look at several of the theoretical perspectives that we have in psychology. We'll deal with part, and then in the next section we'll deal with the rest. So let's say, what's a theory? A theory is basically a group of logically organized laws. When you have an idea that you think that is how things are, but you have no facts to back it, that is called hypothesis. If you have facts that supports this hypothesis, and it has been supported over and over and over again, then it becomes what we call a theory, more or less an organized law, which we use to explain much of the behaviors and mental processes that we have. So theory is an explanation of facts and relationships in science. It's an integrated set of principles that organize and predict observable behavior or events. So that's what we should note about a theory. We'll first have hypothesis. Once a research has confirmed the hypothesis, others have also confirmed it over and over several times, then it moves from being a hypothesis to a theory. So a scientific theory summarizes hypotheses or groups of hypotheses that have been supported with repeated testing. In other words, there is enough evidence that have been accumulated over the years to support the hypothesis. And once that happens, it goes beyond hypothesis. No longer hypothesis, it moves to the next step, which is a theory. And it becomes accepted as a valid explanation of an issue. And so that's what we should note. The science of psychology, as I said, deals with several approaches. And each of these approaches or theories have merits or advantages, as well as disadvantages. It is more a matter of a personal preference for any psychologist to decide which of them to use to explain the behavior. Some take a bit from each of them to get their own perspective. Others hold on to just one. So it is worth understanding each of these perspectives in psychology, and then you decide which of them you think you will be able to use to explain behavior. So there are various approaches in psychology, and an approach is simply a perspective that involves certain assumptions or beliefs about human behavior. That is the way they function, which aspects of them are worthy of study, and what research methods are appropriate for understanding this study. So what it means that if you pick a particular approach in psychology, then you are limited to certain tools you have to use if you want to work with that approach. You are limited to it. You can't use certain tools anymore. You just have to stay to that. And then your focus as to the kind of explanations you'll be given for behavior will also be determined by the type of approach that you select. So there are several different theoretical approaches. Some have subdivisions within them. So this section is just to give you a broad idea about the key ones that we have in psychology. So the first one we'll look at is biological perspective. Biological perspective or biological approach. What do they say about behavior, or how do they try to explain the human behavior? For the biological perspective, it's based on the assumption that all behaviors correspond in one way or the other to the activities of the brain and the nervous system. The biological perspective believes that our behaviors are controlled by hormones and things that happen in our brain as well as the nervous system. So they seek to understand the link between both electrical and chemical activity of the brain, the chemical activity of hormones, heredity on the other hand, and the link or the influence they have on behavior and mental processes. So they believe that human beings differ because we are born with different genes and we develop slightly different brain and hormonal areas. So the explanation, as you can see, is basically on the biology, our genetic makeup, our makeup, most often which we do not have control over. So some of the issues that would be of concern to somebody holding on to the biological perspective would be, how does the brain work? How is it related to our thoughts and our feelings and abnormal behavior? Do certain genes that we inherit from our parents predispose us to certain diseases and disorders? There are certain genes when we inherit from our parents makes one to become alcoholic, make one to get depression and things like that, and how are messages transmitted within the brain. So this is basically what the biological perspective will be concerned with, trying to explain behavior based on our genetic makeup, the working of the nervous system and stuff like that. The next perspective we'll look at is evolutionary perspective. And they believe that all the behaviors that we exhibit are because they have some kind of survival value, and so they have been handed over to us from our ancestors. So because they have survival value, they have been handed over to us. So they look at how evolution of behavior comes about and how that influences what we do these days. So they believe that much of human social behavior, such as aggression behavior, mate selection, they have hereditary basis. They believe that every person wants to marry a partner who is healthy, who is beautiful or handsome, because it has some survival value. It will make your offspring live longer. They will not be prone to diseases. So those are the things that they look at. Issues about evolution, how it has been handed over to us. So evolutionary psychology holds that behaviors or traits that occur universally, behaviors that we can see in all cultures, are good candidates for evolutionary applications. They are good because the human race needs it in order to survive. So they believe that if you should meet somebody that you do not know that is your relative, and you meet the person, you will be able to feel some kind of attachment for them. So that is what evolutionary psychology is concerned with, how these various traits have been transmitted from one generation to the other onto the present generation. The next perspective we'll look at is behavioral, the behavioral or learning perspective. This theory lays emphasis on the environment and observable behavior as manifested in the stimulus response mechanism. They believe that our behavior that we exhibit is a product or a function of the individual and the information that we get from our environment. In other words, whatever behavior we exhibit now is what the interaction that is going on between the individual and the environment. It doesn't depend on only one person, not the environment, not the individual, but the interplay between the two is what gives rise to our behaviors. The two, how we interact with the environment, is what gives rise. So learning or experiences is what drives behavior. That is one of the key points that they hold on. Learning or experience is what will give rise to our behavior. It's not the working of any genetic makeup. It is not the working of any traits that has been handed over by our ancestors, but rather how you, the individual, interact and experience your environment. Under it, we have several subdivisions, several mini approaches under them. We have what we call classical theory, we have instrumental learning, and then we have observational learning. We'll basically look at them briefly. Classical learning or classical conditioning is the type of learning that is formed by associating one thing to the other. So most of the time we call it learning by association, how one thing and the other goes. If, for example, anytime some thick clouds forms around and it rains, then over time we'll get to know that whenever thick clouds are formed at a particular location, rain will definitely come. That is learning by association. No human being is born to, to stop when they see red. But the moment we get to the traffic light and it's red, we stop. That is learning by association. We associate the red traffic light to stop. We associate the green traffic light to drive on or to move. That is learning by association. And this was given to us by a gentleman called Ivan Pavlov. And then we have another called the Operant Learning, which is learning by reward. They believe that human beings make conscious efforts to bring the behavior into existence. And anytime we exhibit a behavior, if the behavior is rewarded, we are more likely to repeat that behavior. But if the behavior is not rewarded, we will not be able to repeat it again. So for example, if we should study so hard and you've gone to write exam and you've obtained a good grade, you are more likely to study hard the next time when exam is approaching. But if you study so hard and then the grade happens to be very bad, you will not learn. So that is operant learning or learning by reward. And then we have the social learning or learning by observation, which we also call it imitational learning. It says that most of the time the behaviors that we exhibit is not because we are being rewarded, it's not because we are associating one thing to the other, but it's because we see others exhibiting that behavior. That is why we also exhibit them. Because others display that behavior, that is why we also do them. And it happens all the time. These days when the celebrities wear some dresses, everybody wants to wear the same dresses. That is learning by observing. You see others do it, and then you also do it. Sometimes we refer to it as monkey see, monkey do. What you see others doing, you also want to do it. Imitational learning or observational learning. So these are some of the key theoretical perspectives that we'll have to look at. In the next section, we'll look at some more. Thank you.